Hello and welcome to another episode of the HaskinCast Podcast. I am your host, Scott Haskin, and I am here with a returning guest with his new album. He came on with his single last time, just in July. Going to refer you back to episode 252, and we are now on episode 271. So moving a little bit forward in time, about 3 months or so, and let's welcome him back to the show. Ivor SK. Ivor, how are you?
Not too bad at all, Scott. Thanks for having me on, mate. How you doing?
I'm doing great. It's my pleasure. I'm really excited. I love the album, and I love that I think I got your name right this time.
You've absolutely nailed it. You've got it. It's rare over here. It's hard in an American accent. I'll cut everyone a bit of slack, but no, you've got it on the head there.
Well, I think the thing that's confusing is it sounds like an A, but it's written with an O. And I think that's what throws people, at least if they're reading it anyway, that's what throws people off. So like if I hadn't met you already, I get the information from your publicist and I'm like, okay, Ivor, great.
Yeah.
A name I'm unfamiliar with, but easy enough. And then I'm wrong.
It's one of those ones that's not quite phonetic. So it just throws you off a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, when you were on the show last time, we talked about the potential for this album, Mississippi Bound, coming out. And I thought I knew you were going to make it happen. I didn't know how long it was going to take because, of course, everything's different now. We're still in the wake of not being 100% I still think that there's a pandemic going on. It seems like the numbers are kind of up and down. Some people seem to think that it's been over for a while. I'm just going to err on the side of caution and not die.
Yeah, no, amen to that. Amen. I'm with you, mate. Yeah.
That's kind of my strategy. But you had been working on these songs since really about the beginning of the pandemic and are just, now coming to the point where it all came together.
Exactly. Yeah, it really was. Once the pandemic hit around that year anyway, 2020, I had the plan to get recording anyway. Mm-hmm. So the pandemic was just a little bit of a nanny coming in and saying, okay, come on, it's time to start now. So it was nice to have all that free time, and it was really wrapped up by mid 2021, even mixing and mastering. So I'd probably finish recording it early 2021. Mm-hmm. And then it's just been getting it, the timing right for the release. Even since we spoke last with the single, I've had to wait usually almost like 4 or 5 weeks longer for CD production than usual, just because of everyone's having shortages with suppliers. So it's definitely a new universe to be in, but it's been really nice to nearly have it out. It releases in about 7 hours down here, so I'm looking forward to that. Yeah,
right. And so this episode's actually going to air on Sunday, so it will be out, and I'll have the links for you guys in the show notes. Just to get around the YouTube algorithm, if you're watching the YouTube version, which is going to be more interesting than just staring at my logo on the podcast app, there will be no audio clips in this because of the YouTube algorithm and copyright violation and all that, which even when you submit, a lot of times they're still like, yeah, you can't do this. So if you're listening to the audio version, you'll get the clips. But even in the YouTube version, you've got links to it, and you can just go right to, whatever your source is, whether it's Apple Music or whatever, and you can be able to listen to the clips. You can buy it right now because it's available, and you should, because it's a great album. We're going to actually do a kind of like a song by song on it, which I'm really excited about to hear the background on some of these. But I've got to say, just to start off from, and I'm an audio engineer and a picky one at that, from a production standpoint, acoustic guitars are probably the most difficult instrument, apart from some orchestral instruments like flutes can be really super tough to EQ. But I think to capture an acoustic guitar with real clarity is one of the most difficult things that an audio engineer has to deal with. But you, like I said on the single, you've nailed it.
Thank you for saying. I really appreciate it. And it is, I think, I got incredibly lucky. I do have to say that. Even my very first album, I just used an SM57 pressed up against about 6 inches from the sound hole of the acoustic. And I thought it was going to sound horrific. And I could not believe the sound when I heard it back. So I've been very lucky with mic and acoustic guitar pairings, because I know, like you've been saying, I know engineers who go through hours of pairing different mics, different angles with acoustics, just to start to get the sound that they'd like. Mm-hmm. So I got very lucky with this album. I had a Taylor, kind of almost a 3/4 size Taylor. So it has quite a punchy mid-range.
Hmm.
And I have an AT4044 mic, an Audio Technica, a mid-diaphragm mic, and it's condenser mic, and it's just been beautiful to pair with that. You can almost doesn't matter where you put it, get a beautiful sound depending on what you're going for. And
Hmm.
then I've also been fortunate that I really just use my fingers with the acoustic. Occasionally I'll break the pick out for little parts here or there. But I think I've definitely found since I've dropped the pick, particularly since moving to New Orleans and it's more finger style, the mics have been a lot more responsive to it with the acoustic. They pick up a lot more dynamics and a bit more of a rolled off sound just using the pads of your fingers on the acoustic too.
Well, and it makes sense because you're not burying the sound of the note in the attack of the pick, because you hear the strum of the string when you use your finger, as opposed to the pick scraping or plucking the string. You're not taking up space with that hard attack, and you're getting a much more warm sound out of the guitar because you're not burying it.
Absolutely, and that's it. And that's another great thing about it too. When your fingers hit the strings and you start to get used to it, it feels like you have more dynamic control within yourself too. It feels like with the pick, you're going through the plastic, and you obviously get to feel a certain amount, and you can pick harder, pick softer, but it feels like you've got all these other notches. I've got sort of, okay, I'm using my thumb here. I can hit it this hard. I can pop the string off if I need it. I can
Mhm.
stroke the string down a little bit more and get a softer brushing sound. So it feels like you've got a little bit more weapons in the arsenal with your fingers too, which is lovely.
I can understand that. Do you feel a little bit more one with your instrument when you play it that way, when you don't have that separation of the pick?
Without question. I mean, up until 26, 27, I couldn't really play a guitar if I didn't have a pick. I was all at sea.
Hmm.
And so my fingers started to come off the guitar when I still had a pick. I was trying to copy saxophone players' solos. And because
Hmm.
they've got that octave key, finger used to start gripping some of the higher treble strings to get that octave happening. But I've certainly found that since I've dropped the pick entirely, not even just for solo stuff, but for picking chords, you have this entirely dynamic range, and it does feel like it's more of an extension of what you're getting in your head. I guess Jeff Beck was one of my biggest influences as a guitar player, and to
Hmm.
see a guy who was that good and that musical, who used to come out, or still does probably, taps his hand in a big bowl of talcum powder like he's in the Olympics weightlifting, and then comes out and plays just with his fingers all night. And you just thought, I can see why now. You must have all this feel and dynamic range after 40, 50 years with just your hands.
Right. And now I'm not a guitar player. I'm a terrible guitar player. I'll put it that way. I can record something from time to time if I really need to, but I'm more of a bass player. And I started in the opposite direction. I started playing fingerstyle, and I find it more difficult to play with a pick because I'm so used to playing fingerstyle. But most of the stuff I write is more ambient, so I prefer that anyway. I'm getting kind of that same effect that you are with your acoustic. But when I go to play something with like maybe rock and roll, I want that harder edge. And I find it so much more difficult to play because picking style is so different from finger style. It's that back and forth sweep, but it's the timing of it. The rhythm feels different, even though it's the same tempo.
Absolutely, and I've always felt that with bass too. I mean, I play bass on my albums, although I'm very rudimentary. But I
Mhm.
mean, you'd know far better than I would. It's also just harder if you're doing down and up picking or 16th picking on a guitar, and then you try and do it on a bass. You've really got to. I mean, it's like an acoustic instrument. You're really
Mhm.
pulling the sound out of a bass guitar with a pick. It's serious work with a pick, no question.
Yeah, that those thicker strings really do make a huge difference. I wanted to ask you because I had a feeling that you had done the bass on this, but are you using an upright for some of it?
So it's funny. I've got a basically a three-quarter size Ibanez acoustic bass guitar,
Okay.
and so it is. It's basically acoustic for two of the songs. I messed around with playing upright, but I just couldn't nail it enough to do a take with it. But I think in the future I might, because I've always been a pick player with bass. In the past, I just played electric bass and it was huge. And the only way I could really get what I needed done was with a pick. But having this smaller acoustic bass, I do want to start messing around with fingers just because you really do. It feels like you can really pull a sound out of a bass. You see the double bass players really have technique where they the sound goes with their hands. So I would certainly like to maybe mess around with some upright stuff, but no, it is an acoustic bass on the album. Yeah.
Okay. Well, it has that acoustic sound to it. It's some of it's played with like the upright style. So I was wondering if that's how you did it. But I could kind of describe the difference between a guitar and a bass like this, going along with what you're saying. A guitar is almost like, hey, I can make sounds, help me make sounds. And a bass is like, if you want it, you got to come and get it.
Yeah, exactly. It's very true. Yeah. No one can sort of phone in a bass performance.
Yeah.
You can get some great pedals on a guitar, plug it into a great amp and have a great sound. And you can get some interesting stuff. No one can turn up sort of, half asleep to a gig and play bass and pull it off. I mean, drummers and bass players they really are holding the whole house together for everyone else. Yeah.
Absolutely. I've always considered them sort of the foundation of the song, and then everything else is the walls and the doors and the sink and all of that. It is a very interesting difference. And especially if you're playing both instruments and you're jumping from one to another, like having to just adjust your playing to be able to cover all those things is quite a skill in itself. Did you find that your skills grew while you were doing this one?
Absolutely. Particularly in the past, like I said, I'd played with larger electric basses. To have a smaller acoustic bass suddenly let me expand a little bit more on bass lines and do things I just physically wouldn't have been able to do previously with the electric bass. So I think the bass lines certainly went to places I couldn't have previously taken them. And also, some of just probably the rhythm guitar playing. I think I'd played so much fingerstyle acoustic for so many years that when I did pick up the electric guitar and I played a pick, that kind of had taken on kind of a new rhythmic sensibility from the years of playing with my fingers. You can start to pick it up a little bit more. And I think listening to the piano players down here too really inform some of the rhythm playing in your hands with the guitar, because it's so funky. Nothing's on the beat. Nothing drops on the one. It's all on the E's or the ands of a bar. It's very syncopated. So I think that too, that's certainly that's been a big learning curve between my last album. I think there's a lot more rhythmic sensibility going on. Yeah.
I could see that, listening to these songs, I could definitely see that. It is a very rhythmic album, regardless of the tempo. I mean, you've got some a little faster, but mostly like mid-tempo and a couple of slower ones. And but even with the slower ones, like you really feel that pulse. It almost brings it out more. And that might be a combination of just the bass in the mix, and some of those have like a bass drum sound. I don't know if you're actually using a bass drum. We'll get to that. But you definitely feel the pulse in each and every sound. But I think, isn't that also kind of a combination of just the structure of the song, but also the way that you play the guitar? Because you'll strum and then you'll almost do like a percussive hit where you stop the strings while you're strumming them.
Absolutely. It was a big part of learning fingerstyle guitar was you have just constant pulse going with your thumb. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you start to bring in triplets or whatever it might be over the top. But that pulse that runs through everything is basic, almost underlies every song I play live. It's like it's your own drummer. You kind of need a drummer, and your thumb's the closest thing you've got. So that's your rhythm section holding it. And you're absolutely right. It gives you this, the chords have a snap to them because they'll respond to just this pulse underneath. It gives you space to really build. I guess, again, going back to the piano thing, it's almost like a rudimentary piano where you've got a band at your fingertips and you're trying to make it a drummer, a bass player, and a rhythm guitar player within one hand, if you like. And so, that pulse is part of it for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I do find it interesting that the bass was very subtle. I don't think there's a single song, except for maybe the last one, where it was really up front. But you still, even with that subtlety, you still feel it. It's still very much a part of the song. Was that something that was intentional, or did it just kind of come together in the mix that way?
It was because I've got, like I was saying, I have that pulse that runs through. There's always quite a dominant bass part coming from the acoustic guitar. So
Yeah.
you're always, I was a little bit worried that the bass would be stepping on each other's toes and it wouldn't quite work. So
Mhm.
I used, particularly for a few of the tracks, I'd just get the acoustic guitar and the bass part, and you just work them as best you could so they weren't stepping on each other's toes, and it sort of worked.
Mhm.
But a lot of credit does have to go to Zeev, who mixed the album, because we talked about it a little bit, and it sits there just right. I think if we'd pushed it too much further forward, it may just have muddied up things with the bass end of the acoustic guitar. But no,
Right.
so it did. Yeah, no, it's very cool you picked that up, because it was one of those things. If it had been too much, it might have just dragged things down a little bit too much.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a certain amount of things that you can do with panning, helping with the separation of the instruments, but there's still that clash of so many low frequencies that are going to be split between your ears and then that center and every spot in between. This is me demonstrating spots in your ears. So it does become a challenge, and you're absolutely right, because this is a style of music where you do get a good bass out of the guitar, even if you're not necessarily playing lower frequency notes, it still comes out just by the style itself.
Exactly. And it was one of those things with this album that I hadn't necessarily done with the previous ones, is I wanted to start with the base of how I would play it live.
Mm.
If I can't really sustain these 15 or whatever songs are going to be on the album live, I'll wait until I can get them that way. So almost every song has basically a complete acoustic guitar part within it that can stand by itself. So
Mm.
you're absolutely right. Once that's there, you've really got to be careful about how the bass comes in. Although I guess I had that advantage because they'd been bumping around in my head for so long as complete songs with little bass parts in the acoustic guitar.
Mm.
I guess your brain had long enough to maybe figure out, well, there's a hole here. If I play up here, I won't be stepping on the acoustic guitar too much. So over
Right.
time, I think that was probably again the blessing of having all that time to record the album, was you could sort of go, that bass part's too busy. I could pull that out because the acoustic guitar part's carrying everything that need be there.
Yeah, and it's interesting nowadays too, because it seems like a lot of musicians and bands too, that they write the song and then they go ahead and record it right away, and then they pick which songs they're going to do live, and then they have to learn the songs that they just wrote so that they can go out and perform them. And I think about, bands I've been in, trying to get a record deal or trying to get a recording done, and it's like we know those songs so well, we barely even need to think about them when we're playing them. It's not like that anymore. It's write, record, go constantly.
It's unbelievable. I mean, even down in New Orleans, hearing about recording sessions, and I'm assuming there'll be weeks of rehearsals. We'll tighten up the arrangements. We'll do everything. People are getting sent rough demos 2 nights before the recording session.
Yeah.
You're in there, you may get 45 minutes to have some run throughs together, and it's straight in. So you're absolutely right. The modern era has changed that time where it's like the back of your hand and you're almost sick of it by the time you're going in there to record. It seems to be gone now. Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess there are some advantages because it is fresh. It's still exciting to play. But then there's like, well, we're recording this, so I have to be perfect. But then no, you don't, because you can, even with drummers now, we can overlay tracks. They can pick and choose. They can, comp different tracks together to make a final track. You don't even need to be that good anymore to turn out a great product. And I think that's a shame. I do love that it's going to be fresh when you record it. I think there's going to be probably a better energy in it. But I start to question everything I hear going, is this really a performance or is this something that was kind of cobbled together?
It's funny. I've sat in studios where that exact things happen. The drummers nailed one of the verses. The groove's fantastic, and they've just copied and pasted that groove for the first verse into the second and the third because the other ones weren't quite as good. And for that exact reason, there was no warm up. You were running out of time in the studio, and they've just copied and pasted. But you're exactly right. It is a shame because, like you said, that fire is important. There's no doubt the fire in the first few takes,
Yeah.
but it's something about the humanness of recording. Like I remember when I used to teach Honky Tonk Woman quite a bit, and that starts at about 90 beats per minute and ends up at 130 beats per minute, and you just love that because it's been a take. There's been no punching in. There's nothing like that's happened. They've caught a moment and everyone nailed their part for the time. And it is sort of disappearing a bit, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, and when I go back and I listen to music from the 70s, a lot of it is so imperfect. It's so human, even when they're supposed to be going dun, 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 like they're not together. And I love that. And now it's like, no, you got to fix that. Everything's got to be together. We have to take all the humanity out of it and just make it so it's technically perfect. I want human. I want a little bit of, let me hear the bass a split second after the drum hit. Give me something that shows me that people recorded this live.
I couldn't agree more. Like I love Motown stuff, and I love that they'll have a tambourine player, a maracas player, a cowbell, a drummer, and there'll be those sharp soul hits. But it's no one's ever right in line, but it's that funkiness that just makes it so addictive to listen to. It was a real moment in time.
And it's funny because those people were doing the same thing. They were throwing songs together as quick as you possibly could and recording them, and they still had that that humanity to them. And of course, everything was analog back then. They didn't have the ability to do what we do now. I love Motown. That's one of my genres that I go back to quite a bit, and I just find so much authenticity there. I think.
Yeah.
Even though they're like, well, we need to put this hook in it to make, like, it was strategized, a lot of it was, but it's still in the performances, you feel a lot of it is really natural.
It's just we're hearing stories all the time about it of the guys, the Funk Brothers, and they'd be playing at a club in Detroit. They'd get a call early in the morning, and James Jamerson would have had so much to drink he can't sit up chair, so they're laying him down on the floor and he's pulling off these bass parts, sort of 17 vodkas into the night. And it's just, unbelievable they could get him to play that well in those situations like that.
Pretty amazing. Well, speaking of playing, now it wasn't that long ago that we spoke, but things were kind of starting to open up a little bit in Nashville. Where are things at now for performance?
So everything's kind of back to normal. I've been booking an Australian tour too, and everywhere's booked up solid.
Wow.
It just seems everywhere in the world now, as far as I can tell anyway, is just sort of open again. The streets are flowing with music. There's even clubs opening up that didn't have music before that are having music now at like brunch times and things like that. So
wow, that's great.
It's been very cool.
Yeah. Now, I know that here we have a lot of stuff going on, but it seems like international tours, like bands coming over from Europe and stuff, is still a bit of a snag. We have a lot of people here, but we have a lot of American bands or smaller bands that are coming over and touring. But we haven't quite hit that, A-lister international bands coming over just yet. I think we're going to get there soon. I think maybe earlier next year or so. But you're going back to Australia. Are you going to get to play the what was it, the Box Guitar Festival?
It's going to be back home in New Orleans on
in New Orleans.
January 18th to 21st, I believe it is this year. So that'll be back home in New Orleans, but I'll be heading over to Australia in early November and doing a 6-week tour back home there, which will be very nice. And that's where life sort of opened up. I'd obviously have a passport, so life's a little bit easier. I don't have to go through the visa or the performance visa hurdles, which are even worse no matter where you are, it appears to be. So I have been able to get back in relatively easy to Australia. So that's been nice. And then, yes, I'll be back in for the Cigar Box Festival in New Orleans in mid-January, which I'm really looking forward to because that got cancelled last year. So as the fingers crossed, if the world stays sane until January, we'll be doing the Cigar Box Festival.
Yeah, well, fingers crossed. I mean, the last thing we need is some kind of resurgence or something. It seems like we're heading in a milding effect, and hopefully we'll just keep going. I think Christmas will be probably the next big event, because that's when, again, when people really get together and families get together and spend long periods of time. So I think if there's a potential for anything, it would be then. But hopefully, we've gone long enough, and it seems like it's kind of petered off. So maybe between the distancing and the variations and all that, we're getting past it. Now it's everything else recovering. Like we're nowhere near back to where we were here in Las Vegas. But I'm really glad to hear that New Orleans is thriving. I mean, if you've got clubs that are now kind of expanding instead of just saying, well, here's the model we have, they're actually going a little bit more. That's a little more inspiring.
Absolutely. And it's been great. New Orleans is such a festival heavy town. There'll be a poor boy festival or a fried chicken festival this weekend or that weekend. And so it's been so strange not to have that for 2 years, but that's back to normal, and they'll always have at least one stage of music, if not more. So that's come back in full swing this year too, which has been really lovely to see. So I guess it is too. There's that high, that lift off of when life goes back to normal, but can clubs sustain it, having had that 2 year hole? So hopefully there's not some dropouts over the next year or two, because it just does get too difficult. But yeah, at the moment things are. You could be forgiven for thinking there hadn't really been a pandemic in some nights in town now.
Right. And it must have been weird, though, to walk the streets of New Orleans even late at night and not hearing some jazz band playing a funeral dirge as you're walking through the streets.
I went to the French Quarter in like the second or third month of the pandemic. A friend and I drove down, and it was absolute ghost town. We walked the streets of the French Quarter by ourselves for an hour, and it was just that sort of thing. You'd at least hear music on the streets, the funeral dirges or the buskers, nothing coming out of the clubs. It was, vaguely Armageddon-ish, like you're on a movie set or something of a horror movie.
Yeah, I told all my friends that are in film, I'm like, get out there and get footage, because you're not going to get this chance again, whether it's, drone footage or just like go out and do something commando and get some footage of empty freeways in LA and, stuff that you are probably never going to see again in your lifetime. Now's the time.
There's some serious archival work being done in the last couple of years.
Absolutely. Well, let's get into this album. It's called Mississippi Bound. Like I said, it is out now. I've got the links in the show notes for you guys. The opening track is the title of the album, Mississippi Bound. You knew when we talked a few months ago, you knew what the album title was going to be, but you picked the state that is probably most difficult to pronounce and spell for most people. You didn't say Utah bound, which would have been a little easier. What was it about Mississippi that kind of drew you into that state and that thought process?
Particularly moving to New Orleans from Australia as a blues musician, you're always hyper aware that you've got the Delta up there, you've got Clarksdale and all these little towns that are huge on blues tourism for being where Robert Johnson sold his soul to the devil and all the rest of it. So when I came to America for the first time and got to spend time in Louisiana, it was one of the first trips we'd make. Mississippi State has put all these little markers up in infamous blues spots where Muddy Waters used to live, or Robert Johnson was born, and all of this. So we used to go to Mississippi all the time. I just fell in love with it. And it kind of was the initial inspiration for playing acoustic guitar, sort of dropping electric and going into the Delta styles was all the trips. So I've been making fairly regular trips there. And then when I moved here permanently, I used to go over there and work. I still go over and work Mississippi once a month and play a few gigs over there.
Oh, good.
So I just fell in love with going over there, particularly because I grew up on the coast in Sydney, and right next door we've got the Mississippi coast, so you can sort of play some blues and dip your sands in the water, and it's kind of, it's nice to head over to Mississippi and get those flavors. So it was just one of those tunes. It wrote itself in about, I don't know, 5 or 10 minutes. The melody was there and it was all sort of there, and it was literally what we used to do, just head over to Mississippi and get out of Dodge for a few days, enjoy the sun and the sand.
It's interesting that you say that because the very first note I have on this song is that it's a great travel song. Like this is a song I can see you just getting in the car and hitting the highway or getting in a boat and going down the river and not really thinking about anything, just enjoying that moment and being immersed in it.
That's exactly it. And that's what that was definitely the vibe I was going for, just hitting the road, having a good time.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess it's a departure from the album in that it's almost a ska track. I guess if its genetics come from anywhere, it's a bit of a reggae thing to it. And
Yeah.
it started life as an R&B tune. I really wanted kind of a Fats Domino, 50s rock and roll, Earl Palmer snare drum groove sort of thing.
Mhm.
But I think it was that driving to Mississippi, and then you get to the beach, and there's palm trees and a sea breeze, and it took on a little bit of a ska thing, particularly with the connection between ska and rock and roll.
Mhm.
It's also closely related that ska thing just took over, I think, because of that road trip vibe. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and that's one of my favorite moments when I drive out to LA to go to the NAMM show. Typically I go out a day early and I hit Newport Beach, and that from just the first time I can look over to the right and see that first little crack in the of air where I can see the ocean. That moment, and I'm still a good 20 minutes away from parking, but that moment is just worth the rest of the drive, worth being tired and all that, because you know where you're about to be and to connect with the elements of the earth and all those good things. You grew up surfing, so that's kind of your world. But for me, I get that once a year, and man, that's paradise to me.
Yeah, it is. There's something magical about it. I don't know what comes off of the ocean, but it's worth
Yeah.
a lot.
Yeah. I also pointed out too that in this song, or wrote a note that the snare is really tight on this. Like it's not so poppy that it cracks your eardrum, but it is a really tight for a gentle sound of a snare, because it doesn't sound like it's being hit that hard, but it's really tight on the head.
It is, yes. Very cool you picked that up. I did study sort of ska drums, particularly from the 50s, I guess the heyday, the beginning of it all, but
Mhm.
right through the 70s, 80s, and Horseman, a famous dub drummer from the UK who's Jamaican but lives in the UK. And it was one of those things. There was a theme that you picked up on. They were almost like very, very melodic snare drums,
Mhm.
very highly pitched, very highly tuned. And a lot of the time it was with the toms too. It was almost xylophone-esque. You'd hear them hit
Yeah.
down the kit on like a reggae kit or a ska drummer, and it
Mhm.
was very musical. So yeah, it was one of those things that just sort of fit the vibe of the song, and sort of, I guess it was. I tried to do my own thing with it and incorporate a little bit of R&B, but I definitely wanted to show a little bit of respect, I suppose, to the old ska techniques too.
Oh, sure. And it really fits almost like the New Orleans vibe too, because when you listen to those drummers in the jazz bands, their snares are almost as tight as like a marching band.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. With all the rolls they do, and they almost get that chatter going. It's almost like hearing a conversation when they do snare drum solos.
Yeah.
It's very funky to hear.
And they really utilize the head all the way up to the rim to get that, like you were saying, the melodic side of things, because most drummers, especially in like rock or pop, they will hit more towards the center of the head where we have that extra pad of coating to make the head last longer. But yeah, they really roll right up to the edge, which deadens the sound. The closer you get to the edge, the deader it is, because you're not hitting the open air. You're hitting more where it's tightened down. So yeah, that was one thing I picked up on very quickly, was how tight that was, and I thought that really lends an interesting sound to this song, because I would not have thought we should do that on this, but I'm so glad you did.
Yeah, it was one of those things. So I did play around with a few different snare sounds, but it's
Mhm.
funny, isn't it? Every now and then you just pick a particular drum sound or whatever it might be, and it just, even in isolation, you might think, no, there's no way. And then you throw it into the pot with everything else, and it just fits like a glove. And it was one of those moments. Yeah.
Well, that's why they say too that you should never EQ an instrument by itself, because it doesn't matter how it sounds by itself. What matters is how it sounds with the mix of the song. So if you took one of your acoustic guitars, right, or your bass, and you're like, you know what, it's just too muddy. I need to put some gain on it, or I need to put some high end EQ on it. Maybe do a high shelf or a low shelf or something. and you're like, okay, now it sounds perfect. And then you put it in the song and it sounds like crap because it doesn't work with the rest of the instruments now.
And I can't tell you how many times I did that in the early days of recording. Particularly as a guitar player playing electric, you get so hung up on guitar sounds and tone and thinking, oh, this is rubbish. And you spend all this time and then you throw it into the song, you think, oh, it doesn't work at all. So I'm back to the drawing board again. So yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
When I started to learn mixing, it was live. So I kind of had the advantage of you just have to make it sound good while the band's doing a sound check. So when I started doing like studio recording, I started to switch to that and basically just was told no. Don't do that. So I do it on the occasion if something sounds wrong and I'm like there's something about this tone I don't like, I might solo it and just kind of play with it a little bit, but I try not to go too far off of that mark because for that same reason, I don't want it to just, why does this one instrument sound so clean when everything else has a little bit of a tone to it? You
That's
know?
it. It is funny you mention that too, because that is very true. I have seen those experienced engineers who can just tweak things in an instrument by themselves, just by sheer ear experience.
Mm-hmm.
I've been in this situation so many times. I know which frequencies are doing what, and I'll just tweak this ever so slightly so it slips in a little bit easier. So that's
Mm-hmm.
very true too. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a combination of experience and knowing your gear.
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
the way that you work with your gear, you can find those frequencies a lot easier than if you jump on a different mixing board. I mean, they're the same frequencies, but you're listening through different speakers. You're not as familiar with where to go for everything. They might be using a different compressor. It's really, yeah, it's an interesting combination of skills for sure.
Mm.
Our second song up on the album is called "I Don't Roll." I love the twangy feeling of this song. It feels it feels almost like old school country, even though I wouldn't define it as country.
It's funny you say that because I really pictured it almost as like a Stonesy acoustic song in a way, at its very germination anyway. That's how it was in my head. But as soon as I put the bottleneck sound in, it just took on that southern lilt, that country folk Americana-ish kind of thing as soon, particularly with that bottleneck slide in there.
Mm-hmm.
And there's another song that just sort of wrote itself in about 5 or 10 minutes. At least the melody did. It was all there very quickly. But it was for a song that I really pictured as a kind of a Stonesy, rootsy tune, and then even has elements of trad jazz or soul in there with some of the progressions. I think that is it's kind of got a stripped back folk country feel to it, which has been very cool. That's one of my favorite things. You can write a song with all these ideas in mind, particularly when it's just in your head and then you start to get it out and it sort of does its own thing. Well, that's a good idea, but I'm going to do this, and it's going to do its own
Yeah.
thing, so I won't argue with it. Yeah.
Yeah, and as minimal instrumentation as you used on this album, I mean, you've got a little bit of percussion, but like we said, the bass is subtle. You don't have a lot of tracks. You don't have a keyboard on every track or a piano on every track. It's very minimal, mostly acoustic guitar and a couple of variations of different kinds of guitars. But the album on the whole still sounds very rich and full. I don't feel like it was recorded, in your basement. I don't feel like it needed more. I mean, it really delivers itself on a complete sound and a complete level.
Well, thanks. I really appreciate it because it's certainly one of your worries, I think, when you're doing an album and you're looking at the parts and you know it's going to be that stripped back and you sort of think, hopefully it holds up or this track will hold up by itself. And it probably is, I think, like I said earlier, because I had the basics of how I would perform it solo or the solo arrangement for playing it live. I
Mm-hmm.
think having that bedrock there just kind of gave me a lot more to work through, a lot more confidence anyway, to think, well, if it will stand up live like this, then if I don't have to do too much to it or throw too much in and get too heavy. I think we talked about it with Sweet and Low last time I spoke to
Yeah.
you, where that
Mm-hmm.
was a band track. That was like almost a ZZ Top inspired pumping Texas rock
Mm-hmm.
thing. And not that that doesn't work, and I can still listen to it like that, but when you took that back and you thought, no, look, the acoustic guitar's doing just fine as it is. A
Yeah.
little bit of this and that, and it'll work as is. Yeah.
Well, don't worry. Some band will come along and cover it and do a rock and roll version of it, and then you'll get like Weird Al doing a version of it. And
That would
you'll,
be, yeah, that would be an honor. If the Weird Al can do whatever he likes, yeah, for
wouldn't that
sure.
be like the ultimate compliment for an artist is for Weird Al to go, I want to redo that song, you know?
Absolutely, yeah. I could
That,
not
that
agree more.
to me too, the whole album, and I kind of just put it in terms of like being in Mississippi, and I've never been there, but just from what I've seen of it, I just kind of picture a bunch of people, like maybe a family get together or some friends come over, you barbecue, you have some beers, you bust out the instruments, you're all sitting there on the porch, everybody's got their chair, maybe one of the guitar players standing up, and you're all just playing, having fun. Maybe you're watching the boats go by on the river, but it's just a very casual, relaxed feel. And I don't feel like it was like it doesn't feel like it was stressful when it was being recorded. It just feels very natural. And that goes back to that human side of it that I love so much.
Absolutely. It's funny you say that. I went and played the Mississippi Songwriters Festival last month over in Ocean Springs in Mississippi. And at the end of the shows, at the end of the night, all the musicians went back to the main hotel, and we just had this big circle of chairs, and everyone sat down with a guitar, and everyone stood up and swapped songs all
Oh,
night. And it was just a kind of a real traditional thing they always do there. And you do hear about it up in the Delta too, in Mississippi. You've got the juke joints, you've got the falling down clubs, but they say the real juke joint is like Sunday afternoon at this guy's house. We all go around, there's a cook up, the chairs get put in the circle, and it just becomes a big jam. So
yeah.
absolutely, it's definitely been influenced by that sort of atmosphere, unquestioning. Yeah.
Yeah, I could definitely feel that within, the songs here. So well done on that. I think that gives it just a fantastic atmosphere. Our next song up is called Get Up. And when I first started listening to this, I found the opening and the pacing just really intriguing. It was something that, while I was listening to this album, I tend to try, at least the first couple times I listen, I try to really not be doing other things. Sometimes I have to. And I started to make notes about something, and I just stopped and I went, let me hear that again. It just has a really unique feel to it that really drew me in the first couple measures.
It's probably, if I had to pick one, it's probably my favorite song on the album.
Hmm.
And I think because of that, it's hard to describe the feel. It's kind of a slinky groove. It's a
Mm-hmm.
little bit different. There's time changes within there too. It goes to double time in the song and then at the end. But that was, yeah, absolutely one of my favorite tunes to do. A lot of the percussion, I didn't want to use traditional percussion too much. So my manager actually found this, I don't even know what it is, this huge drum. It's not properly tuned. You can't really tune it. It was at like a kind of a $2 store somewhere. And that's the bass drum on the album. I didn't have any mallets, so I got some drumsticks and held them at the pointy end, so to speak, and just
Mm-hmm.
wrapped tissue paper on the end to get like a mallet-esque
Mm-hmm.
sound. So that's the bass drum. There's no hi-hat. I just laid a bit of tissue paper across the edge of a bookshelf and played my drumsticks on that. So it
Mm-hmm.
almost started as like this rhythmic build up, and you got this slinky kind of groove going on. And it just from that point on, it was so easy to write and record over the top of that because it was, once that groove was set up, it was almost maybe Dr. John or Tom Waitsy kind of in a way, in that kind of homemade percussion sort of thing. I know Tom Waits used to drag chairs across the floor and get people to record that and that sort of thing. So
Right.
I think I was trying to get that kind of vibe going with the groove. Yeah.
But that works so well with this kind of music because if you think about, again, going back to like that circle of musicians, you run out of drums, somebody else shows up and they want to play. All right, well, grab a spaghetti pot out of the kitchen and you just turn it upside down and just bang on that. Like it's really the kind of thing where you create the sound, and I think that worked perfectly. But I wanted to ask, am I hearing a bit of a tremolo guitar track on this one too?
Absolutely, yes. There was actually another guitar part, which was the main guitar part that the song was built around. Like I said, I tried to have an underpinning guitar part. So
Mhm.
the live version sounds quite different. It's got an entirely different part. And that tremolo guitar was really just as a little accoutrement to the main guitar. But once Zeev dropped that out, my friend who mixed it, that tremolo thing, it just gave the whole song a bit more space. You've got a bass guitar and a rhythm guitar that's sort of playing a little riff that runs through it. But this little tremolo guitar, I kind of left the chords nice, open, and ringing, almost to create kind of an organ sound, I guess. Maybe in the back of my head, I was thinking an organ sustain. So you just let the tremolo guitar ring out.
It's funny that you say that, because I was going back and forth in my mind wondering whether it was like a Rhodes piano with a trem on it or whether it was a guitar. And I finally settled on guitar, but I was back and forth on that for a bit.
And so, yeah, that's definitely what I was going for. I think coming back to the Dr. John sort of thing, it sort of felt you needed at least a Rhodesy sort of sound in there somewhere. And then the rhythm of that guitar part just suited the song really well, and it kind of carried off with, I guess it's the only other song on the album that really has almost a lead guitar running all the way through. On the other side, there's a lead guitar playing single strings while I'm singing too. So that kind of open, loose, warm tremolo sound with that stinging lead on the other side, it was fire and ice. It was kind of nice together like that.
And it's great. And I love that you didn't overplay that, because it seems like most times when a guitar player switches to tremolo or does a track, it's almost like, hey, look, I'm playing tremolo, instead of it just being almost like a background filler the way you used it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I probably got fortunate with that because I was playing off of the original guitar part that's not in there anymore. But you're exactly right. It wasn't, if I'd gone in too gung-ho and thrown it front and center, it could have thrown the whole groove off, or at least just gotten too heavy up front for everything else. So it's just it's like it's insidious. You know it's there and it's creating an atmosphere, which is kind of nice. Yeah.
Right. Because typically my response when I hear a guitar player do that is, oh, look, he got a new pedal and he had to put it in a song. You know?
It's like Christmas. Look what I got, Martin. Yeah, I know, yeah.
Right. Yeah. Now go write something with your new gear. No, I love this song. This is one of my favorites too. And it just has such a great feel. And I think that what's interesting too, is I had said earlier that the album sounds very rich and full. And it seems like when you hear a song like this, and then the rest of the songs don't have that, it seems like the rest of it would start to feel empty, because you don't have that extra filler in there, but it doesn't.
Yeah. That's another thing with Get Up too. It ends as sort of a blues shuffle where the drums come in. And that was originally how this song started. The whole thing was just a pumping shuffle with drums all the way through. So that may have been a moment where I thought, look, I think that's just going to clash too much with the rest of the album. But once the homemade percussion came in and it went into the drums, particularly with the track that followed after, which was just straight acoustics again, I was certainly a bit worried. I thought, I'm not sure if this is going to work. We'll see how it is when it's mastered. But no, you're absolutely right. I couldn't agree more. It's heavy and there's lots of stuff going on, but it doesn't stick out like, it just sort of works in between the acoustic tracks it's with, which is kind of cool.
Exactly. And that is a nice build, by the way, the layer of going from the percussion to the drums. Because sometimes when you introduce drums, it can be too shocking. It can take you out of the song a little bit. It can make you feel like it's one of those combos of two songs being put together and you've switched to the second song. But I felt it was just, it felt very organic, which I liked.
I really appreciate it. It's kind of, I think the other thing I liked too was repeating the first verse again for that last verse that goes into the shuffle. It just sort of built that tension where you think, well, I've heard this before, so what's going to happen that's different on this? And then when the drums come in at the end, it's just a little sign that something's changing. So it kind of that symmetry worked out well too, which was nice.
Absolutely. Boy, if you don't know somebody that you can relate this next track to, you just need to go on Facebook or something for a minute. Talking Shit Again. This one really gripped me musically. It's got such a beautiful guitar sound to it. What can you tell me about that? Because I wasn't able to figure out how you put that together.
So this, when I sent it to Zeev, was just a double-tracked acoustic song. So I'd done, uh, for people that don't know, double tracking, you just play one guitar part and then you play the exact same thing again. You can do it as many times as you like to get an enormously fat sound. But I sent 2 tracks off to Zeev, and I got a message back from him saying, I've played around a little with this one. Let me know what you think about it. And I absolutely loved it. It was flanger, phaser, chorus. There's a whole mixture of little things in there, just this blend of little effects. That almost gives the song, like, I'm a big Taj Mahal Rai Kuda fan, those kind of roots blues artists,
Yeah.
and into almost world music. Taj recorded albums with Hawaiian bands, so did Rai Kuda and Mexican bands. And they love to go around the world with those sounds. So the guitar sound almost had a bit of a world music thing to it. There was elements of like African sounds. Ali Farka Toure used to play with similar sort of guitar sounds. And so at first, it just absolutely knocked me out of the park, because I always thought it was going to be a very stripped back, raw acoustic tune where I'm whinging about people talking shit. And then he sort of sent back this beautiful flowing guitars, and it was yeah, absolutely perfect.
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised in a way that there were so many effects on it, because I didn't get the feel that it was affected. I kind of got the feel like maybe you played it in a different room or something. The effects are so subtle that you don't notice there's a flange, for example.
Exactly. That was the coolest part, was it came back to you, and I couldn't really put my finger on what had gone on. I just loved the sound of it. And so it was exactly that. It's just enough of a pinch of that. It doesn't sound like you could go and buy a pedal and get the sound. Although I wish you could. But you can't. So it was that very, again, it's, you'd know from your sound expertise, it's such an art form within itself, that mixing and mastering, and what a millisecond of delay here or there can do. And it's just those little touches. But you're exactly right. It's kind of modulated without being overtly modulated. And it just seems to suit the feel and the nature of the song really well, which is very fortunate to.
Yeah, well, my compliments to him on that one, because I think that really hit a different level for you on this song. And with this kind of music, the sound by the time you get to song 4 or 5, for me, can tend to get a little bit stale. Okay, it's another acoustic guitar song. Okay, he's using a slide on this one and not on the last one, but it's just so much of the same sound. But I don't get that feeling with this album, because each song brings in something that's unique. There's something different about the guitar sound on each one, where it doesn't sound like you just sat there with an acoustic guitar and a microphone and made an album.
Exactly. Yeah, like, I really appreciate it, because that is one of those things where you definitely think about it. You've got such a basic set of tools to work with. That is just going to fall into just a homogenous hour-long experience.
Yeah.
And so it certainly does worry you. And that is, I guess that's the funnest thing with recording and sound, is that you can suddenly think, well, every little thing can have its own spin. Some of them can be a lot more basic. Some of them can have a little bit special going on, or a little bit of modulation here or there. But no, it was one of those things you were very aware of. Don't want the listener to go from this song to that song and go, has the song changed? Or is this the same song I was listening to? This track 4, 5, or 6? I can't really tell anymore.
Yeah, or which one's your favorite? It was one of the ones in the middle.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you want every song to have a personality. But I mean, and it's the same with other styles of music. I mean, rock and roll can get that way. And there's some bands that I listen to, I'm like, I can't tell one song from another. But this style of music seems to really be kind of advanced in that, where it's like you could just get one sound, here's my album, go like it, and not really know the difference between one song and another.
It's very true, particularly in this. I mean, it's certainly an easier recording experience in that sense too, that you could just mic up an acoustic guitar, sit there, and then cut song after song after song, which would be an interesting challenge to, I guess, create enough contrasting compositions that if it's just you and an acoustic guitar, it can retain that interest.
Yeah.
Yeah, it has been really fun with this album to certainly push out there with sounds more than I ever have before. I've almost tried to keep things stripped back and very plain, but this time I just, maybe with the pandemic, more time on your hand, you sort of let the handbrake off and think, well, what else can happen here? Yeah.
Yeah, I do feel like sonically this is a very wide open album.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Particularly with the sound palettes, the electric guitar sounds. I used all sorts of different amps and sounds and pedals and all sorts of things. And it just, even in the recording of it, it just makes things a little bit more fresh. I've got a
Yeah.
different pedal here. I'm getting a different reaction when I hit this pedal, so it kind of re-inspires you within the process of making an album.
Absolutely. The next song that we have on this one is called Kiss on My Blues. I love that title. I love the foot stomp in this one. It sounds like it's a foot stomp. It really kind of, the song's got a good tempo to it, but that really goes back to that everybody's sitting in the circle or sitting on the porch and we're all just having a good time. Somebody's got to keep the tempo. So, this guy over here is going to do it. But I really dig this song.
It's very much so. And this was definitely one of the ones where I wanted it to be fairly stripped back, straight blues. I recorded a foot stomp a few different ways just on a wooden floor here. But that was another one where Zeev came back and said, listen to what I've done with the foot stomps. I'm not quite sure if he mixed his own sound in with it or just gave it a nice treatment, but it really does work. It's a heavy foot stomp without dominating the track. It just helps propel it along. And then it's probably, maybe other than another track at the end of the album, No Friend of Mine, maybe one of the most untreated acoustic guitar parts on the album. It's very simple. Just like you said, it's definitely like a backyard Mississippi, we sit down and have a jam on a boogie sort of song, which was definitely what I was going for.
And I have to wonder if he didn't roll off the attack maybe a little bit on that foot stomp, because I don't feel like you're getting the attack. Like you're not getting the hit, you're getting the sound of the hit without the actual contact.
Isn't it true? You're just getting that whoomp, that sort of whoomp that comes after it, which is so nice. It gives it just kind of a meatier, gutsier sort of feel, which is very cool.
It's almost like a muted bass drum.
That's it. It's like they've just shoved every blanket they can into that bass drum, and it's just got that killer dead. And that's how it would sound in Mississippi. There's probably using a 60-year-old bass drum that doesn't really work, and who knows what's in there, sort of thing.
A couple of rats live in there, and
exactly, yeah. It's technically a habitat, yeah.
The other thing I noticed about this one, and this is another one where I think the subtle bass really works. It almost makes this is such an oxymoron, but it almost makes it stand out more the quieter you try to make it.
Yes, exactly, and that is exactly it. And it's kind of, it is a great lesson in subtlety, even in playing Kiss on My Blues, because it's got, again, that thumping bass pulse I was talking about. I realized I was just playing that song way too hard in every sense with the acoustic guitar. And so I think rolling off the bass drum like that, and then me just sort of not attacking the guitar so ferociously, just made it bizarrely hit a bit harder and just really float and groove a little bit better, which was lovely to hear.
Yeah, and with the end result being what it is, I certainly can't argue that strategy, because I think it came out great. This next song, actually, I would have thought would have been a ZZ Top title. It's called Sex, Drugs, and Cigarettes, which just seems right up their alley.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it does seem like I've taken Billy Gibbons' favorite habits. Yeah.
This is another one where I just love the background guitar, and I love that you didn't make it the lead guitar, because I think it's more effective being a little bit more subtle.
Absolutely. And it's funny you say that, because when I initially demoed it and put it together, that guitar was right out front and center. And then you realized as you were working on it, I've really got to pull that back. And as you pulled it back, everything else just sort of opened up within the song. And it just, again, kind of a nice warm sound. I was trying to get as much warmth and almost old analog-y sounds as I could at the best of times. So that's a Sex, Drugs, and Cigarettes. The guitar on that certainly has that warmth to it, which is lovely.
And you know what I've noticed too is when you have a guitar player that plays a lot of just in between licks, little things that you would think they wanted that to stand out to make the song more interesting. A lot of times when they put it to the side or they put it in the background, it actually has more meaning than being in your face. If it's too in your face, it becomes distracting, right? It takes you out of the song. So it's almost better to have it be subtle and just be something that you notice and go, ooh, what was that?
Exactly. It just becomes like a nuance within the song itself. And it's one of those things, if you took it out, it'd feel like the song's empty. So just a tiny little sprinkle of it in the right spot. And it's funny. It is like cooking. All those cooking cliches come up with songwriting all the time for a reason, because it's just a sprinkle of this or that can make so much of a difference.
Exactly. And there's a really nice solo on this one too. It didn't feel like it was planned. It felt like it was just very natural. Here's what I'm feeling in the moment, and you just played it.
Exactly. Some of the solos on this album were one or two takes where you love what you've done, but you've got to tighten it up a little bit more. This was one of those ones I sat down, not really with the intention of cutting a final solo whatsoever. And it just came out and you heard it back and you thought, I can't really argue with this. I'm not going to do a better one anyway.
Nice. See, that's why you record everything. You record your rehearsals, you record your writing, you record everything, because you just never know.
But isn't it true? It's the first rule again. One of the things I learned the hardest way, we've done rough takes where I can't believe I didn't hit the red button for this.
Right.
But yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, and I think part of it too is if you're not trying to record, if you're just, I'll just record in case I come up with an interesting idea I want to listen back to, and you don't go into it with the pressure of the red light's on, I've got to nail this take. I think you're more likely to come out with things because you're relaxed about it.
It makes all the difference. I think one of the best things, it almost be impossible, but the best thing in the world would be to record an album without knowing you've recorded an album. Just sort of like if someone's been recording what you've done through time and there's suddenly an album there, because you're absolutely right. Self-conscious, oh God, the red light's on and suddenly the fingers are stiff. You're not as relaxed. And it's psychologically what recording can do is pretty fascinating.
And it's worse when you're recording a live show, with the intention of releasing some material, because not only do you have the pressure of, I know the red light's on, but now you're doing it in front of an audience and you're trying to be extra perfect and you're not relaxed. It's a completely different show than it would be until you probably recorded 3 or 4 shows in a row. And then you're like, all right, I'm good with it now.
Exactly.
Get through it.
Well, we've always said if I ever recorded a live album, I think I'd probably need to do 20 nights or something to get close to being happy with it. Exactly. Yeah, that would be quite an experience.
Well, maybe what you need to do is just that, like have somebody record it, like get a mix from the board, a multi-track, without you knowing that they're doing that.
Exactly. I think that's going to be the only way I'd ever comfortably put out a live album. Absolutely.
Yeah.
The subconscious sessions. Yeah.
Now, I heard, is there also a clave on this one?
There isn't a clave. There's just a whole bunch of percussion instruments in there. Some of them are hand claps. I used to put my hand in strange gloves and hit claves like that. A lot of banging drumsticks on bookshelves too. I had a bookshelf that I was just sort of recording different things in the room that sounded fantastic. But not, again, another one of those tracks though, not dissimilar to Get Up, where there's hand claps, there's cowbells, there's quite a bit of stuff going on through it all.
But you always layer it in gently, which I like. There isn't a single song that I can think of, and again, I've only heard it a couple times, but where it just starts out and everything's there, and you're like, "Wow, I guess we're on the ride now." It's everything is sort of introduced and given its own opportunity to be noticed and appreciated. Whereas, like in rock and roll, for example, you would probably just start out, "All right, well, I'm just putting the car in gear, and we're going."
Yeah, it's so true, isn't it? It's just it's all pedal to the metal immediately.
Yeah.
And particularly when I first started messing around with that multi-layering of percussion, you realize how little you need to make it work. We used to get all sorts of tambourines and every sort of thing. You just think, this is a mess. Get 3 or 4 really nicely, if they sit into each other and they all work with each other well. The depth of sound, the wall of sound you can make with 3 or 4 percussion instruments is pretty phenomenal.
It is. I find now, I used to be one of those people like, all right, what else can I put in here? And now I'm like, do I need anything else? Do I even need all the layers that I have? Because I might have over recorded this.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's funny, you hear about directors having to take their favorite scenes out of movies because it doesn't work in the movie. And you often have moments like that where you're sitting like, I love that part, but I think I take it out, the whole song works better. And it is one of those moments where it is like Jenga, like what can I pull out and still have this thing hold up as is? Yeah.
But do you find it's difficult at times going from artist to producer and having to, as an artist, go, but this is my baby, and then as a producer going, but you don't need that kid?
It is the worst part. It is a nightmare. I guess it's good to have people to send it to and they say yes, no, or and that's certainly where all your friends and the other pairs of ears come in so handy. But you couldn't be more right. It is, particularly because you've been there from the germination. You knew how hard it was to get that take, and or whatever it might be, and suddenly you're going to have to jettison it in favor of the song. It's never a nice experience. No.
Yeah. You're right. And I always go back to the old adage of you never proofread your own term paper, because your brain already knows what you wrote and it will miss so many things. Like when I wrote my first book, between my brother and I, we read it 13 times, checking it for spelling errors and grammatical errors and all that sort of thing, and put it out, went to do the audiobook. And when my reader was working through even the first chapter, she's like, oh, this is wrong. Oh, that's wrong. 13 times, how do we miss this stuff? Well, because we weren't really reading it anymore. And I think when you try and produce yourself without some kind of feedback from people you trust, people that aren't just going to go, oh, my friend, yeah, everything you did was great. Your brain does the same thing. It's like you don't hear the tambourine that you put in there anymore because you mixed it in there and it's subtle and you've kind of forgotten it, or your brain goes, yeah, I know there's a tambourine. So I think it's really vital to have people that you can go to with a mix or a piece of music that you can trust to give you valuable feedback.
I mean, unquestionably. Like, I mean, the amount of people I know who are great musicians and can mix and master, they've got all the skills, but they say, oh, look, I'd never mix my own stuff or master my own stuff. I want that to go through 2, 3, 4 more sets of ears. So you get that well-rounded view, particularly when the people have been mixing or mastering or whatever it might be for 30 or 40 years. I mean, you can't really, attain that sort of experience or that sort of, I guess, attunement. It really is an art form, isn't it?
Yeah, very, very true. Next up, we have a song that I really dig. This song, it's called Wheelin'. It's got such a great dual guitar on this one. I think as far as the guitar parts go, this is probably one of, if not my favorite combinations of guitar tracks.
Unreal. Very cool to hear that, because I've just started incorporating it live, and it's an absolute ball to play live too.
I bet.
Works really well. But that was like one of the funnest things about this, because the album had been in the works for a long time. A lot of it was pretty much ready to go by the time I sat down. In terms of arrangement, you obviously played with volume or what could come in and out, but the songs were as is. And that second guitar part, I guess the lead guitar part of the dueling too, that was really sort of improvised almost on the spot.
Wow.
We just sort of played around with it, and it just sort of worked. The melodies came really quickly. So in that sense, it was very fun. It was one of the most jamming-esque sort of songs on the album, as much as you can if you're doing it yourself.
Right.
But it was just kind of, it was very in the moment. The second guitar part happened really quickly. And I guess it's one of those things when it does happen that easy and it feels right, you just don't really argue with it. You just think, well, the song's telling me what I need to be playing here, so I'll just do what I'm told. Yeah.
And that's probably one of the things that attracts me to the song, is because I love that organic, things just come together kind of feel. Because I feel you can tell when a song is strategic. You can tell when a song is overproduced, and there's just something that really draws me to that. I guess that honesty, where it's just like, this just happened. The muse was in the room. She was sprinkling dust everywhere, and you were breathing it in.
Exactly, because you're trying to catch that expression, hey, and it's that sort of moment where when you get that recording where it feels like you've caught that. You've not caught someone necessarily hitting their marks, but you've caught someone in the moment. It's that initial reaction to the music. It's got that fire to it. It was, yeah, very, very fun to do in that sense, because you just sort of, particularly because everything you're rehearsing, you're trying to get tight as possible before you record. So it was so nice just to roll in and feel inspired in the moment, and the track comes out. It's a lot more free time.
The only problem with tracks like that is they're the ones that you spend the least time on, because they're like so enjoyable to do, but you spend the least time because you don't need to go any further with it.
It's very true, isn't it? Yeah, it's time flies. It's definitely time flies when you're having fun there.
Yeah, for sure. But I mean, you don't need to figure out things. It just comes together, and it's like, well, I got that done quick, and I was having fun, and now it's just over.
Exactly. Yeah, it's got that feel to it.
Mm-hmm. Our next song on the album, and this is another one that I have to say, like, is just a great travel song, and it's called "Taste Your Lips." But it's another one, like, I could just get in the car, put it on, and be like, how quickly can I be on the highway? Because that's where I need to be right now.
It's got that roll to it, and it's not even that it's a fast song or it's like a pumping, driving highway song, but it just has that. It's a great cruising song. Get in the car and go for it. It still just works perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, I guess, a bit of a departure, maybe the closest thing to a ballad on the album, if you like, on if you were going to have a ballad on the album, but it's kind of a jammier, slower thing. When Zeev and I were working on it together, he said he got a very Pink Floyd-esque sort of feel out of it. But I almost pictured Hendrix when I was first recording it, kind of loose and open. The drums come in for the chorus. There's loose, kind of esoteric guitar coming in from other sides. But that's certainly been one of the most enjoyable to do. And that was one of those songs that really, I almost did just acoustic. It sits there as a solo acoustic piece, okay. But once you started to get some of the deeper guitar sounds in, there's some slide guitar that comes into it. And then the bass and the drums just seemed to fit. They weren't too heavy.
Yeah.
It was certainly one of my favorite ones to do and listen back to. Yeah.
This is another one where I love the snare sound on it. But I'll tell you, the impression I get, and even though I'm an audio guy, I can be like a very visual person as well. And there's something different about the way that the sun sets in the autumn. There's a different glow that spreads across the land as the sun goes down. There's just a different feel than like a summer sunset or a winter sunset. And I definitely feel, I was actually listening on my way back from Phoenix last year around this time, and I was listening to an album by Roger Glover. It was a solo album for the first time, and I was getting ready to do a review of it. And it got here like 2 days before I had to leave. So it was really perfect. But it was a similar album. There was a lot of acoustics on it. And as I'm driving back, I said, I better hurry up and listen to this because I'm like 3 hours away from home. And it was just at the time that the sun was starting to set, and I'm seeing longer shadows and just that golden feel in the sky. That's the feeling I get out of this song. When I think about, being in the car and driving down the road, it's not just driving down the road at any time. It's driving down the road as the sun is starting to set, and there's that just golden air about everything.
That's lovely to hear, because it does have that. I get a very relaxed, warm feel out of it. I mean, I guess the lyrics are almost, it's kind of like breakup lyrics, I guess, in a way, but the song itself does give off that warmth. It could almost work as an instrumental. And really give you that sort of glow feeling to it.
I can see that.
It was very cool. It kind of, I really like that. I could definitely see it as like sort of a sunset, autumn sunset sort of song. Yeah, it's very pretty.
Yeah, this is definitely the one that hit me with the strongest visual out of everything. I mean, I get little little flashes of things here and there with most things I hear, but there are some songs that just right away I go to this, it's not the end of the summer, it's autumn. There's a big difference between those two things, and it just dialed right into that. So this again probably is going to be my favorite song, or one of my favorite songs on the album, just for that visual alone. So thank you.
No worries. It was again a very fun one to do. But yeah, I'm glad you've dug it. It's got that. I'm glad it came out the way it did. Yeah, it's I guess different in the album in that it goes between that dynamic shift between having quite airy and light verses to a groove comes in for the chorus, airy and light. So you've got that feel to it. It's a little bit of a departure for the album.
I would say if there's the closest thing maybe to a party song or just a fun kind of jam would be this next one, $100 bills. $100 bills is what it's called. This just has I'm not a person who dances by any means, but I am a drummer, so I have that physical rhythm side to me. I just kind of want to pick up something and bang on it while I'm, not bang on it, but play along to it. It gives me a physical purpose when I listen to it.
I felt the exact same impulse, because if you listen to the song, there's 3 percussion instruments on it, and that was it. That's sort of a pumping bass drum that goes through it, and everything was going. But when I was figuring out how I was going to work the rhythm track, I had tambourines, cowbells there, a little wood block, and it just became just what you want to do. You just wanted to pick up instruments and play. Even the guitar parts felt very like that. I wasn't, everything was set as far as the progression was going with the acoustic guitar and the bass. So all the other guitar parts, you just wanted to bang on it. You just wanted to add another chunky layer of rhythm into the tune. So I'm glad you got that pumping vibe too.
Oh, definitely. And the guitars really added to the rhythmic side of things too. I mean, they're melodic. You've got your melody, but I really felt a lot more rhythm in the guitars as well. And I think it might have just been your playing style. Maybe you were hitting a little bit harder on this one.
Absolutely, I was. And it was, I actually used a thicker pick. I tend to use medium picks, but I got a little bit of a heavier pick for just really driving it. Because this song, the rhythm guitar part was working, but as soon as I put that pick in, you could almost hit lighter with your hand, but get more attack. It felt like there was just a bit more presence in the track to it.
Yeah, let the weight and the thickness of the pick do the work for you.
Exactly.
Yeah, great song. Probably the moodiest song I would say on the album is the next one, Tomorrow Night. Now we're past, so there's 15 tracks on the album. This is track 10. So we're a ways in. We've kind of established the feeling and the overall emotion of the album. But this one really kind of changed direction of it for me.
It was even probably moodier when I demoed it too. It was drenched in even more reverb. It's a song that has a lot of reverb, a lot of space going on. I was probably initially inspired by sort of Ry Cooder, old blues songs where it's almost spooky to listen to in a way. There's lots of reverb. It's just an acoustic guitar. You hear the slide smack up against the neck of the wood of the guitar and all of that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And it was just almost, I guess, came from a point of humor in terms of lyrics. You're just sort of throwing with a whole bunch of bad situations or things you'd rather not do and say, yeah, well, maybe tomorrow night, maybe not tonight.
Right.
But absolutely. And I kind of liked the fact, I think, that the song had that, almost had like a light aspect to the lyrics, but quite a dark, I guess, the other side to the Mississippi Delta, when you're there at midnight when Robert Johnson supposedly sold his soul to the devil at the crossroads. Mississippi's very spooky at night, driving around sort of the 2-lane highways, almost no lights going on, the gravel roads everywhere. So I think I was probably trying to channel a little bit of that feel into this too, particularly because it's one of the straighter blues songs on the album, I guess, in terms of progression anyway. So yeah, definitely channeled that darker Delta vibe for it.
The music definitely does seem a little bit subdued to the vocal on this one, whereas I think there's a good combination, but it seems like the story was a little bit more important, and the music was really there just to be supportive on this one.
Absolutely. I mean, in terms of guitar parts, this was probably the simplest off the top of my head, just to
Yeah.
play and learn and get ready for the album. It was more of a basic blues part. So you're right. I think it did more become about the delivery of the words themselves, and just how it all worked, which just led to stripping those guitars. Again, just a two guitar track, really, a
Right.
little duet behind the vocals. Yeah.
Well, I would be curious to hear the demo, and because I think that having this really saturated in reverb could bring out a really haunting quality to it. But I think again, there's that audio engineer brain of mine going, but would it work in continuity with the album? Because I think it would take me out of the flow of the album a little bit, because the other songs don't have that reverb wash to them. I mean, they feel very natural, like I'm in the room with you, not we added reverb to make it sound like you were in the room with me.
Exactly. But like the reverb, particularly in that track, almost becomes an instrument, if you know what I mean. It's almost
Mhm.
like it's kind of a tool within the song, but it definitely is almost like Taste Your Lips in a way, in that it's a slower song, on Mississippi Bound, in that it's a bit of a ska tune.
Mhm.
Tomorrow Night is a bit of a departure in that
Yeah.
it's kind of, it could almost fit on a darker blues album entirely itself. It could almost sort of be part of another stack of songs, which is
Mhm.
kind of cool. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I like it. Uh, our next track this is a little bit ironic for me because it's called Down the Road, but I did not feel like getting in the car and traveling on this one. It made me just kind of want to sit there and tap my foot a little bit. It's a little bit lighter and bouncier than the rest of the album.
It is. It's kind of got probably the closest thing to an instrumental. There are some lyrics at the end, but I'm just saying down the road until the end, basically.
Mhm.
Almost like I guess there was kind of a gospel edge to it when I initially started making it. It's just got
Mm.
basic tambourine that come down on 2 and 4 with occasional fills here or there.
Yeah.
And then two acoustic guitars playing off one another. So it almost had kind of a gospel thing, in that you have that repetitive word at the end over the top of the chords as they happen.
Mhm.
Um, but it was definitely, you're right, it's kind of a bouncy, maybe blues. There is a kind of a blues progression. It does cover 1-4-5 thing, but yeah, you're absolutely, it's kind of a foot tapper. You do sit there and you bounce along to it.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit different. You kind of get lost in the guitars, and it was one of the few songs I really worried about those interplay between the guitars. I've
Mhm.
got one that's a little bit lower, playing what might be considered the main melody, and then I made a little another guitar at the top that plays kind of rhythmic punctuation, just to propel the thing along with the tambourines on the side. But it was yeah, again, another little departure. I kind of like that very southern influence, sort of hearing all those upbeat gospel songs spilling out of churches down here. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say it has a little bit more, I think, of a Nashville quality to it than what I would expect to hear in Mississippi. But I could also hear like a jazz band playing this and doing, kind of their own version of it. I think that would suit this song well. But I think that, honestly, the key to this one, in what you're saying and being concerned about the guitars, is the balance.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Particularly between the two of them. I did worry about it quite a bit, and I did have to tailor the second guitar part just to fit in really well.
Mhm.
And like you said there, which was very true, I could absolutely hear a jazz band playing it. And it was very
Yeah.
inspired by the second line funeral band you hear down here, where um, I guess in funk music, the general school was you land on the one really heavy. You'll hear James Brown or Bootsy Collins say, we
Mhm.
all land on the first beat of the bar, and then we get as funky as we can in between. So we all smack back down on the one.
Right.
And in New Orleans anyway, the funk sort of happens on the 4 and. So it'd be
Mhm.
like a 1, 2, 3, 4, and.
Mhm. It's always leading.
Exactly, the whole thing sort of rolls. And
Yeah.
that's really where probably the initial inspiration for this song came from, was um, kind of thinking of the main melody as a bit of a horn line, and then my bass guitar strings as being the tuba and the sousaphone underneath, sort of bumping along. But everything's sort of just off the beat. So it was very sort of gospel jazz band influence. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Now that you say that, I could definitely pick that out. I thought there's something different about this, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. And now that you say that, yeah, that absolutely makes sense.
Unreal. Yeah, it does. It's probably, yeah, in that way, one of the most overtly New Orleans influenced tracks down here for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. For the next song on the album, this I have to say you picked the perfect tempo for it. And listening to the lyrics, and I'm not a big lyric guy, but every once in a while, lyrics, because I find the voice, I think of it more as an instrument. It's making sounds like a guitar or piano. But every once in a while, words will cut through. And this just sounds like an absolutely perfect day to me, a day like I would love to have this day and relive it over and over. And it's called Slow Down. Was this based on an experience or something you want, or where did this one come from?
So it absolutely was. In 2018, I believe. Yes, 2018, I went to Canada for the first time to tour and play.
Hmm.
And I stayed with some friends who live right on a little lake there, or an inlet for a lake. They're right near a lock station, actually.
Oh, okay.
And so we used to have boats. As I stayed there in a little cabin by the water and you'd be practicing, you'd have boats come by. And as they come too fast because you're in a slow little laneway, basically.
Oh,
And so there was the guy who ran the house would always come out and say, slow down, slow down, slow down. And then as the trip progressed, we had in Montreal, they had their 2-week holiday from Montreal. So all these boats would be coming through with absolutely gorgeous French Canadian women in bikinis, like stretched out all the front of the boat. So everyone was telling him to slow down. No, you don't need to go so fast. You could take it as slow as you need to down here. And so my friend who I was staying with there, Denis, just kept saying, look, you've got to write this down. This is a song waiting to happen. He's talking
yeah.
about slowing down. So talk about the boats coming past. Then you could talk about the beautiful French Canadian women coming by. And then turn it into a song about a woman who's getting too pushy and you needed to slow everything down. So it literally was. It just sort of wrote itself up in a summer in Canada. And I fortunately just had a little blues melody that had been sitting on my phone for a while. So you had the basic lyrics and you just sat down with it, and it fit a little bit of chopping and changing here or there. And the song came together, which was very cool.
That's awesome. I often, when I'm out and about, I'll come up with a rhythm or a melody and I'll, put it into my phone recorder. And I was thinking not too long ago, back when I worked in a music store, and I thought about, I had a 4-track, and I thought, now there's 8 tracks and 16 tracks, and Roland released a VS880, and, you can expand it and all these things that we could do. If you would have told me back then, hey, in about 15, 20 years, we're going to be doing this on our phone, I would have said you were dreaming. We've come so far.
Because I see people who are like you or me in like the supermarket they've obviously got an idea and they're sort of down at the frozen and food section, sort of humming melodies or lyrics into the end of their phone. Go, yeah, I know. But what a dream. I can't imagine what it must have been like, to grow up as a musician, like the 50s or 60s, where you didn't even have like a little home tape recorder you could have recorded onto us.
Right. Yeah. Well, I was visiting my family in Michigan one time, and this is when I was living in Colorado. So it's about a 26-hour drive from Colorado Springs to the Detroit area. And while I was at my grandmother's, she had an upright piano in her front room, and I was playing around in it one night, and I came up with this melody. And I really liked it. I thought I can do something with this. Like, this is a keeper. I had no way to record it. And so every like couple hours, I would go sit at the piano and play it. So I was trying to get that, that residual physical memory of it. All the way home, every hour I would stop listening to whatever, tape or whatever I was listening to, and I would hum the melody. And I would kind of tap it out on the steering wheel with my fingers. And as soon as I got home, didn't take the luggage out of the car, didn't do anything, just walked right in, turned on my studio and recorded it, and went, thank God.
I love stories like that. And I mean, that feeling, it's hard to describe that euphoria of that feeling to people of just having got it down.
Yeah.
Didn't get away from
just that release. it was amazing. So when I think about it now, I'm like, all I had to do is sing it into my phone. Like just that the concept of driving across the country with no phone in the car and no GPS and a couple $100 in my pocket, not even a credit card. Like that is so foreign to me now.
It's just unbelievable how quickly things have
And
moved
how
along like
dependent.
that. Well,
How
exactly,
how many
yeah.
people could even fold one of those maps now, let alone know how to read it and get somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's funny. I've got where I grew up. There were so many surfers who were also musicians, and
Mhm.
they said what it used to be like in the '60s and '70s. We'd be out there on a perfect day. We'd have got a good spot in the lineup. We're catching waves, and you get a song idea, and you fight it, and you sit there and you fight it. You have to catch a wave in, dry off, drive home, get it onto something, and then drive back to the beach and hope the waves aren't gone or the wind's not blown up and all of that. So
Well,
yeah.
it's kind of metaphorical though. I mean, really, because we're catching waves of ideas before they're gone, before they diminish and maybe you forgot some of the notes or you forgot half the melody and it's just not all there anymore. Just like the waves lose power.
Absolutely.
It's such a fascinating. Thank God we live in the times that we do. I can appreciate that more when I think about those moments. But how many things have been lost over the years just because of not having the means to do it?
I mean, watching now people plug their guitar into their phones.
Yeah,
I've got an idea and I just plug their guitar into their phone and recording. You think, oh my God.
I know it's
Yeah.
crazy. Our next song was the original single that got released, "Sweet and Low." You guys can check out our whole episode on this show, episode 252. I'll have a link to that in the show notes as well. Uh, I still love the song as much as I did the first time I heard it, and that was my introduction to you as an artist. And I just thought, wow, this guy's good. He's going to make a really good album. So thank you for making me right.
Well, thank you for this. Thank you for the belief. That's huge. Yeah, no, thank you very much.
Absolutely. Just a couple songs left to go over. If there's a song title that I think everybody can relate to on this album, it would be this one because it is called "No Friend of Mine." And whatever that means to you, whether it's there's somebody that you thought was going to be a friend and it turned out that they just got to know you to use you or to get to know you to backstab you because of something you did to some other friend or whatever it is, there's always somebody, especially now in the world of social media, that comes into your life where you're like, nope, I'm just done with you.
Kryptonite. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, Very true. Yeah. It's and almost not dissimilar to Tomorrow Night. Something about those lyrics because it's quite a lilting song. No friend of mine.
Mhm.
It's got quite a sort of a jumpy, almost old jazz sort of progression to it.
Yeah.
But I just loved the way those lyrics were against it. They were just sort of it just sort of worked. They were backbitey enough along with the lilting upbeat guitar. It really worked. But no, I'm glad you could relate to it because there is some hoping someone can always find a little something in there to drag out of the tune. Yeah,
Oh, for
absolutely.
sure. And I could tell that this was another one where the lyric was a little more important because again, I kind of feel like the music is backed off a little bit to allow for the story to be told. It's like just the right balance for you to say, there's music here and you should check it out. But first, let me tell you a story.
It's absolutely true. I think it is. I might be wrong, but I think it's the most stripped back one on the album. I think it's just vocals and acoustic guitar. So
Mhm.
it was definitely a time where you certainly didn't want any any lyrics to be misheard, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely storytelling music. I'll put it that way. And our last one, and this was kind of when I was going through the titles, it really struck me because I thought this title is really a lot more. It sounds a lot more aggressive than the rest of the album. But when I listen to the music just has this beautiful blend of notes. The drums are very powerful, but yet you found a way to make the drums powerful without them being overbearing, without it being like, okay, this is the last song, let's go out with a bang and really push the drums in your face. I don't know how you guys, between you and your engineer, how you found that balance, but I don't know that I could have found that. I think it's fantastic.
Thank you so much for saying it. It was probably what I sweated on that song more than anything else.
Mhm.
Because I did when I first sat down to do the drums for it. There were hats on it. I just sat down and played a basic conventional beat to see how it would sound with it. And you immediately went, well, this is way too heavy. So I pulled the hat straight away, in terms of anything constant or tapping through the tune.
Mhm.
And the snare came out pretty quickly. You realized that you probably just wanted to hit the rim here, or maybe even sometimes the side of the drum, just
Mhm.
to get some of those kind of clickier sounds.
Yeah.
Because for a little bit, I was going to double track the acoustic guitar, or maybe bring another supplemental part in to beef up the acoustic. But
Mhm.
you're quite right. I just thought, no, what I probably need to do is gut the rhythm part a little bit, because everything
Yeah.
else is, I mean, there's bass in there, but like you said, the bass is very subtle in that song. You can just about make it out every now and then. So it just ended up becoming flams on the rim of the snare,
Mhm.
and the bass drum. Occasionally, the bell of the ride cymbal, or just one of the cymbals, you'd tap for little. But even then, I never outright hit a cymbal on the song. So it just became about dialing everything back, going right back to first gear on the kit, and seeing what
Yeah.
could work and how it would work as is. Yeah.
And now for the listeners who aren't percussionists, a flam is when you have your two sticks, you hit them slightly off from each other. So you have your hit that's going to be right on the beat, or pretty close to the beat. And then you have one that's a gentler hit just before it. And that creates that flam sound. So it's like two hits that are very close together, but not exactly at the same time. It's something that's done a lot in jazz, especially. Can be done as an accent in rock and roll and various other forms of music. It's something it was one of the earliest things I learned to do as a drummer. So that's what I'm kind of partial to. But it sounds like you also played it again towards the rim and not towards the beef of the head, because they don't sound very beefy or bottom endy. They sound more clicky than they do beat, like a normal snare hit.
Exactly. Very, very towards the edge, right on the rim.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I've always been a big fan of really light drumsticks.
Mm-hmm.
I use Peter Erskine's ride stick, which almost doesn't have anything on the end of the stick. It gets right there and it's very light. So if you a nice light touch, a light flam, or just a light hit, it just suddenly let the song. It was like he just took this whole muddiness or big fat blob out of the middle of the song, and it suddenly just started to float with that little thing. It still propelled it, and you still had that click on the two and the four.
Mm-hmm.
But it was just a little bit, and I think the flam too, like you were saying, it's just sort of, it's almost a little bit lighter than the straight hit, and it
Mm-hmm.
kind of gave it a nice looseness. Some of the flams I tried to go in loose as I could anyway, and try and make it sound, I guess, a bit sloppy.
Mm-hmm.
And it just kind of suited the song down. Yeah,
It does have a very human feel to it, which I like. It
exactly.
doesn't sound like you had to adjust everything to get on that click. It sounds like you just sat down and you played it and you go, that's what it's going to be. Whatever I'm playing on this take is what it's going to be.
That's it. Yeah, the whole song, it just felt nice with kind of a raw thing. Even the in the verses, there's a kind of, not a time change, so to speak, but they just accent in different places than you usually would. There was almost
Yeah.
not a Zeppelin-esque thing, but something a little bit more rockier in terms of
Mhm.
attitude, I guess. There's a little bit more of kind of a rock and roll acoustic blues thing in there for sure.
The other note that I wrote down about this song, which I found just an interesting thing to say, because the song, it's not a huge sounding song. It doesn't have an epic, crescendo or anything to it. It's not very bassy. There's nothing specific that I can say why it makes me feel like this, but I feel this song in my belly, like in my core. There's something about this that really cuts through and hits me in a different way than the rest of the album does. But I can't, even now, I can't put my finger on what it is or why. I just know that that's the feeling it's giving me.
And I'm exactly the same. I don't know if there was more aggression in it when I recorded. I don't know if it caught caught me in a certain moment at time where it carried a little bit more weight, because you're absolutely right. You certainly couldn't put your finger on it regarding instrumentation or a particular sound, or I mean, the bass is quite punchy. The bass drum's quite punchy, I should say, but it's certainly not giving it that. I mean, maybe it was just kind of the air of the song. You're in the sort of the George Floyd era. Maybe it was kind of that 2020 pandemic. Maybe it was kind of that coming in, that anti-police thing that was around it. But it was sort of, it just had a kind of, it's got an edge to it. There's definitely an edge to a song on there that doesn't have, there's no echoes of it anywhere else on the album. And it's just right at the end, there's just a big fat full stop at the end of the album.
But it bothers me that I can't figure out why, why it's giving me that feeling, because like you said, it's not an EQ thing. It's not an instrumental thing. It's not a tempo. I don't know why, but there's something about it. Maybe there's just that colder intention because of that, political vibe to it. I don't know. But if you ever figure it out, you've got to tell me. Like, you just have to call me and let me know. Here's what it is.
I will sleep. Do. I'm absolutely with you, because it is. There's something intangible to it that I can't put my finger on. And maybe it is intent. Maybe we'll try to get back to psychological intent when you're doing the song or something. But yeah. No, I will do, absolutely. If I stumble across the key, I'll let you know.
Yeah. Well, I'm very excited that you were able to get this album out. I know how excited you are when we spoke last time, and you really carried that energy going into it. I mean, it's not a boring album. It's not an album that I would say, well, yeah, give it a spin. I mean, it's an album I could say, even though, again, this is not typically my genre of music, I would pull this album out and listen to it. It's one that I really enjoyed. So thank you very much for all the effort that you put into it and getting it done and making it what it is. Because I think if people give it a chance, I think they'll take to it.
That's very sweet of you to say, mate. I really appreciate it. It does feel good. It feels good to have it out, and it feels good to know it's getting that sort of reaction. I'm glad there's enough variety for everyone to dip their toes in anyway, which would be very cool.
Oh, for sure. And especially for you guys that are watching the YouTube version of this podcast where I'm not playing the clips, go to the link, check it out. Just go to Apple Music or wherever you check out music and listen to some of the clips. I'm pretty sure there's something that's going to draw you in, because the songs, they just have something that makes you want to know what's going on, even if you just listen. Because at first I tried to do that. I'm like, well, let me just spot each song. I'll just pick some random spot in the middle and listen to a few seconds. And every one of them, like, all right, but what happens next? There was something about each one of them that made me want to do that. So for somebody who has a particularly picky and jaded ear, that says a lot for me as a listener. So I'm sure that, like I said, if people just take a few minutes and give it a chance, I'm sure that you're going to find some enjoyment here. So do that. Click on the link, go check it out, buy the album, and then let us know what you think.
So I really appreciate it, Matt. I absolutely loved it. So yeah, you're getting those sort of vibes off it. It's very cool.
Excellent. Well, thank you for joining me for this marathon podcast.
Hey, no, very cool. Yeah, anytime, mate. I love it.
I think we covered it all.
You got it.
Well, definitely come back and see us again. I wish you great success. Have a great time over in Australia. You'll be over there here pretty soon. Let people know when and where you're playing. I've got a few friends over in Australia, so of course everybody's so spread out over there because that's how Australia is. Everything's like, you don't live close to anything. It's going to be a trek, but one worth it. So definitely keep us posted. Good luck with the album. I'm wishing you the absolute best of success, my friend.
Hey, it's so easy. Thanks so much for having me on, Scott. I really appreciate it, man.
You bet. We'll do this again.
Absolutely will do, mate.
Cheers.